Hi there. My local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America is doing a discussion on the Communist Manifesto this upcoming month, and I thought I would do a close reading of the manifesto in order to help people prepare for that discussion and also get some of my thoughts out about the Communist Manifesto. So I think this is a document that's chock full of interesting ideas, but ideas that need to be carefully teased apart, and it's chock full of a lot of vocabulary that needs to be clarified that isn't self-evident in its meaning at first glance, I think. So hopefully this can be helpful for that. Let's jump right in with the preamble here. It says, a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this specter. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals, and German police spies. All right, so right here, the authors are being a bit bombastic and a bit exaggerating of this phenomenon, but there is a grain of truth to what Marx and Engels are saying here, and you can especially see this in the results of these revolutions of 1848 that were about to break out. That broke out that same year that this manifesto was published. And what you see in those revolutions is, especially in the French case, the French liberals start out very aggressive, very revolutionary, very fearless in wanting to topple the July monarchy of Louis Philippe, wanting to initiate all of these liberal reforms, and championing the old slogans of the French Revolution: liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, fraternity. So they're bringing up all the old slogans of the French Revolution. They're trying to inaugurate the Second Republic. This is going to be the French Revolution done right, a second time. That was the one of the great hopes of the revolution. One of the complicating factors is that by this point, in France and in other countries, the class of proletarians, that is to say, wage laborers who had to work for a wage in order to make a living, uh, this class of people were starting to put forward their own independent demands. This was less common in earlier revolutions, partly because the class of wage laborers was not so numerous. There were more either independent, self-employed people or just um, peasants in the countryside who either worked for themselves or worked as a tenant farmer, um, or in some sort of other arrangement. But there weren't very many wage laborers. So, so you get a difference now because wage laborers are actually a more numerous and more pivotal part of society at this point. And you also have workers are starting to get more consciousness of their interests and how they might differ somewhat from the liberals, who, and how the workers might want to, especially if they're going to be the foot soldiers of these revolutions, which the liberals absolutely needed the working people to be their foot soldiers in order to make these revolutions successful. Otherwise, they would have no hope of toppling these reactionary aristocracies and these monarchical governments. If they were going to do that, they needed to get the working people on their side. And in previous times, working people were content to not demand that much. As far as they took the liberals' demands as demands that were universally beneficial and applicable to everyone. The right to vote, and the end of the estate system, the end of privileges according to feudal caste, ending privileges for the clergy, nationalizing church property. These sorts of things were all well and good, but as time went on, workers started to have a consciousness that they had slightly different interests um, from the liberals and from the up and coming bourgeoisie or capitalist class. And they said, well, we would also like not just political equality, but some sort of economic equality, because politics and economics are inherently intertwined. And you can exercise a great deal of political power if you have economic power. There's just no way around it. That's just an inherent fact of the way society works, despite despite how liberals would like to pretend that um, the liberal or the economic and political spheres are separate. You have politics on one hand and then civil society on the other, or you have the domestic sphere on one hand and the public sphere on the other hand. These are very liberal ideas because they preach to this ideal that these spheres of life can be easily separated and that you could have economic inequality but still somehow have some sort of political equality. That seemed to be um, increasingly far-fetched, especially under the July monarchy of Louis Philippe. People often commented that it was run less like a monarchy and more like a railroad company in terms of efficiency and concern for profit and basically national income. So there's a very clear case of how politics was being subordinated to economics. And so workers started to advance their own demands. One of their demands in the 1848 revolution was the institution of national workshops. And a great advocate of this was the French socialist Louis Blanc. And national workshops were basically what you might call a job guarantee. It basically anyone who was unemployed could come to Paris, get a job, and it was incredibly popular among workers. In fact, they started streaming into Paris, unemployed workers, and liberals quickly became alarmed at both the scale of the project and also, I'm sure, it didn't help the labor market too well. The fact that they had all this increased competition from the public sector, and suddenly they didn't have quite as severe of a whip behind workers, the whip of hunger and misery if they didn't get a job in the private sector. So liberals immediately tried to get rid of the national workshops, and it was this attempt to actually get rid of the national workshops after several months that ignited what were called the June Days in Paris. It was this several day long worker insurrection in Paris where the workers took over the city of Paris. They were actually ultimately defeated and arrested, and some of them deported and to islands. I forget, either in the Caribbean or in the Pacific. And this is a very strong lesson to liberals all around Europe that if you ignite a revolution now, it's not going to be a straightforward thing of just liberalism versus the reactionary aristocracy and monarchies. All right, you are opening up a Pandora's box now, because now your foot soldiers, the working class, are going to have their own independent agenda, and this new independent agenda of the working class is possibly even more frightening and more harmful to your interests than the agenda of the reactionaries, and the aristocrats, the monarchs, and whatnot. So you'd almost be better off tolerating the continued existence of the monarchs and the aristocrats and the feudal privileges for the nobility and the clergy and the unequal voting rights and this and that. Just tolerate that, because at least you can use these reactionary forces as a strong bulwark against what's now the greater enemy, this insurgent working class with its own demands now. So, or at the very least, maybe you don't run into the arms of the reactionaries, but maybe you're a little more content with the idea of tolerating them And if, let's say, you make a feeble attempt at asking them to step aside, and they say no, well, what do you do then? Are you going to mobilize the working class as your foot soldiers to go fight the reactionaries? No, you're not going to go that far as a liberal after 1848, because you see what happens if you do that. You get national workshops, you get the June days, right? So you're better off just kind of cowardly, being cowards and saying to the reactionaries, okay, never mind. We said we wanted a parliament and all this stuff, but if you don't want to give us that, that's okay. We just want to make sure that you were going to have your help if the workers start revolting, right? That was really what was on liberals' minds more and more as 1848 went on, and one of the reasons why they so feebly gave up in the German and Austrian revolutions of that year. One reason why Marx was completely disgusted with the liberals for not fulfilling their own liberal agenda that they had preached with great bombast. What happened to liberty, equality, fraternity? All of a sudden they become, whereas before in the French Revolution, 1789, especially 1792 onwards with the convention, you have the liberals being these real firebrand revolutionaries. But now they've become these timid cowards who are running basically back to the reactionaries, for help against the new greater threat, the working class. And so this is there's a great deal of truth, I think, to this opening preamble that a specter was haunting Europe. Now I'm going to pause it there, and we'll continue on with the first part in the next part of this video.